Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you all. My name is Melinda Cooper. I want to welcome you to the 4th International Shakespeare in Prisons Conference. Before we begin, I'd like to invite everyone to post a digital land acknowledgement into the chat. A land acknowledgement is a statement that formally recognizes Indigenous peoples as stewards of the land and pays respect to the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. I'll go first. I'm copying and pasting it into the chat right now. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Mine says, I'm joining this virtual space from the ancestral land of the Kumeyaay tribe who cultivated and thrived in this region for 12,000 years before colonizers showed up to steal the land, which is known today as San Diego. As I said before, I'm Melinda Cooper. I'm a certified project management professional with a background in theater, program development, and arts engagement. I'm a co-producer of this conference today, and I'm thrilled to be here to introduce our fine group of guests. We are joined by a group of alumni from the Shakespeare in Prisons program at Detroit Public Theater, who are contributing authors to the book called Richard III in Prison, a Critical Edition, which consists of the full text of Shakespeare's play, footnotes in the words of Shakespeare in Prison program members, as well as essays by those who worked on the play while in prison. This is a question and answer conversation following up on their pre-recorded session where they discussed what working on the book means to them and the importance of the project as a means of breaking down stereotypes, asserting that the voices of returned citizens matter, and creating access, passion, and ownership of Shakespeare for people who have historically been alienated from it. It was a fantastic conversation. I watched it. I said, you got to let me introduce this group. I'd be so honored. So thank you, Scott and Kurt, for letting me take the floor for a moment to acknowledge the fine work of this group of people. And I invite everyone here to please join me in welcoming program alumni Jessica Christopher, Asia Johnson, and Sarah Lauderdale, as well as their co-collaborators, Director Franny Shepard-Bates and Assistant Director Matthew Van Meter of Detroit Public Theater's Shakespeare in Prisons program. Thank you all for taking the time to come. And thank you so much for being here to answer some of our questions and to ask some of our questions. I'm going to invite Franny to take it from here. Franny?
Thank you for that fabulous introduction. And hello, everyone. I was going to say good afternoon, but I don't know where you all are. So just hello. We're all really excited to be back to having given our overview and being, so excited about our project and everything to drill down into some of the details of the project today and to answer any questions you might have and to try really hard not to ramble. But, we'll call each other out if we do, because we do. I'm doing it right now. So to kind of recap a little bit, our project, so we're Shakespeare in Prison, and we are a program that is freshly 9 years old through Detroit Public Theater in Michigan. And we work both inside prisons and also post-release, as evidenced by this project we're talking about today, which is our very own critical edition of Richard III. And to recap that a bit, what we did was in our 2016-2017 season at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, our ensemble worked on Richard III for about 40 weeks, a little more than 40 weeks, excuse me. First reading and analyzing and discussing the play, and then collaboratively casting and designing it, and rehearsing it, and then finally performing it. And then 2 years later, one of the members of our men's ensemble had an idea that would essentially, as he said, take our work and do other people's work for them by giving them essentially a book that would include the work that we had done. And that idea snowballed, and here we are today. Having reconvened a panel of alumni such as Sarah and Jessica and Asia, who will be here in just a few minutes, to meet on Zoom, because we're all over the place, and go through our analytical process, again, to put together a critical edition of Richard III, where all of the analysis, essays, Q&As, and all of that is in verbatim quotations from these women and the others in that ensemble who worked on the play. So to give a little more detail on that, the idea was had in very early 2019. We did with Jessica and Michaela and Asia, we did kind of a test run. Also in early 2019, we were given funding, very generous funding from Michigan Humanities Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities to get the project rolling in the summer of 2019. And then we did, and we got to know Zoom really, really well, which came in handy when we all went on Zoom in March of 2020. And our group was like, well, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And so from there, we talked through the play again, using a very similar process to the one we used in prison, which we'll talk about momentarily before we start taking questions and everything. And everybody's working on their own material for the book that they're contributing. Matt Van Meter, our hero, took this vast trove of material and created a manuscript out of it. And now where we're at now is we've got that manuscript, we've got this other material, we have a sample layout that I'm going to show you in just a second here. We've got our sample, and we are kind of ready to move from developing the material into the next phase. So because this can be a little bit difficult to describe without a visual, I will now share a visual. So this is a possible way we see this being laid out. So what we see is on the left-hand side here, we have the text of the play. And below the line, we have notes directly related to the text, which are things like, here you see an explanation of, the two-syllable bruised here. Some of our goals have to do with accessibility to the material. And so we want to make sure we're including notes that will help create some of that accessibility. And that'll be our below the line stuff. Over here on the right, though, is really the core of the project, which is these notes that are in these verbatim quotations by ensemble members. So we have right here kind of a general note about relating to the character of Richard in a personal way. And then we have these line-specific analytical notes. Each woman, because we're not able to identify by name the women who are incarcerated or who are no longer incarcerated, but we don't know how to get a hold of them. Each of these women has an icon as a way of making an attribution on that analysis, so that, which these are designed by another alum of our program. And the women who contributed both on the inside and on the outside would have two symbols. So it's a little tough to see here, but this here is a dagger, and this is the same dagger, but shaded in a bit. There are also, as we kind of scroll down, and Matt is going to share this file so that you've got it. We've also commissioned original artwork other than those icons from that same alum. And we will also be including photos. This is some of those women rehearsing Act 4, Scene 1, which is the scene here. And also scrolling down, this has been the most fun ever doing this layout, not being a graphic designer. Performance notes, notes having to do specifically with performing the play. So again, this is something we'd be working with a publisher on, but that's kind of our way of quickly explaining the project without a zillion words, especially for people who aren't familiar with editions like this. Some of our goals have to do with, again, getting this out to as many people as we possibly can, including people who are working in academia and scholarship, people in all kinds of schools, community organizations, theaters that this would be helpful to, people who are practitioners of doing this work, this kind of work, and maybe most importantly, getting the book into the hands of people who are incarcerated, who may not have access to it otherwise, and we'll get into that in a second as well. So I've said enough about that, I think. I'm going to throw it to Matt and ask if you can take a couple, minute or two to describe our analytical process, which is largely the same on the inside as it is out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the overview, Franny. So when we're inside, our seasons run about 40 to 45 weeks, meeting 2.5 hours per session twice a week. So it's a lot of time. Those of you who teach will know that it's a real luxury to be able to spend that amount of time on one play. And so what we do generally is we start out just reading the text, discussing it. We spend a lot of time with that, doing sort of what in theater would be called table work, as well as getting up to do sort of performances and seeing how performing the text informs our understanding of it and the characters before we go into casting and people have a chance to dig into individual characters. And as an organization, we and this is largely an extension of our fearless leaders brain. We take fairly extensive notes. So starting several years ago, we started taking, really hundreds of pages of notes over the course of a season as facilitators, most of which are verbatim quotations from ensemble members. And so we have saved all of these. And so we were able to go back into our 2016-2017 season when we did Richard III at Michigan's women's prison, and have hundreds of quotations, many of which were just sort of off the cuff observations, but many of which were really important, interesting, analytical commentary on the text and characters and situations of Richard III. So with that in hand, we gathered a group of alums, some of which are with us right now, people who had been incarcerated and in our ensemble during our Richard III season. And we gathered up every other Sunday for the better part of a year to once again read through the entire play scene by scene and discuss it. We recorded those conversations. We hired an alum of our men's ensemble to transcribe those conversations. And so we used that as another source of this commentary. And so partly to fill in gaps, but also partly to put people's perspectives in dialogue with what they were thinking several years earlier, when they were in prison and encountering that text for the first time, with how they see it now on a second go around several years later, living in the free world. So that trove of material we edited down into commentary on the play, general comments and line comments like Franny showed you, and that formed the real basis of the core of the text.
And in terms of the way that, and I'm sorry, Matt, did you mention the mechanics of the discussions themselves, or because I can cover that really quick?
Sure, yeah, go for it. So
the way that we do these discussions and the way that we get these quotes is that we we'll go through the scenes sometimes we'll go through large chunks of the scene, sometimes smaller chunks. We read it aloud, we'll pause, make sure everybody is on the same page about the content, and then we'll keep going. And then once we've gotten through however much of the scene we think we need to before we start discussing, we'll just have kind of an open discussion, and build from there. With the idea that everybody's right and everybody's a different kind of right. And we do use, and this is developed over the years, we will use one of the SparkNotes No Fear editions of the play as on the one hand. And then we also started using, and this is all ensemble members' ideas, we also started using, an Arden or a Cambridge for folks who like to take in the information in different ways. And in that we're able to really have these really rich discussions because everybody is bringing their own understanding of the play to the table based on the text that speaks to them the best way. And so we did that with our Zoom discussions as well.
It's worth noting that really a couple of veteran ensemble members really demanded using scholarly texts. Mm-hmm. People who had become quite familiar with Shakespeare's language and wanted to do more of a deep dive than could be done with the No Fear.
And then certain people reminded them not to be snobs.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Really quick. So not really quick. I have like one question for each of our alums who are here today. So, Sarah, if I could ask you first a question. The first mock-up that we did was of a few pages from King Lear with notes from men's ensemble members. Mm-hmm. And when we showed that mock-up to members of our women's ensemble, Sarah was one of the first people to get a look at that. And I wonder, Sarah, if you could take a minute and just share some of what your reaction was to that.
I was extremely excited and also slightly jealous that Matt decided to use the men's ensemble and not the women's like first go round, but it was fine. No, I wanted to do something like that. I thought that would be like amazing for the women to be able to participate in such a cool project. It reminded me a lot of like, we used the No Fear, I personally needed the No Fear version that had like the translation and then the Shakespeare language, just because I'd never really read Shakespeare before, so it was really helpful. And I think that when I saw the pages that Matt put together, I was like, wow, it's like No Fear except the Persian version of it, and like we're so much smarter than the No Fear version of it. So I don't know, we just put a lot of color into it. So I was really excited and wanted to like do a whole book,
which made Matt and me like, we got to do this, and we got to find funding for it, and we got to find time for it, and like this has to happen. So my next question, because Asia Johnson has joined us. Hello, Asia. My next question is kind of returning back to when we are in prison and we're having these discussions in a circle, what you feel like, what your perspective is on what it is about that process that helps to encourage and empower people to share their own insight, whether they're coming at it feeling like they've got a good handle on the material, or like a lot of people say, like, I'm not smart enough to read a book like this, but we end up hearing from everybody. So what's your perspective on kind of what helps make that happen?
I think just first, creating a safe space. You have to have like that safe space in order to feel comfortable sharing anything. And oftentimes women historically have felt like their voice doesn't matter and like their thoughts don't matter. And we aren't meant to think about these themes in this story. And that's just historically speaking. But when you're inside of that place, like you're coming from a place of trauma, you're coming from a place of silence, and being in community with other women makes it a comfortable space. And being in company with Matt too. Matt, you make it a safe space too, not just all the women. We share about not just the text, but about our lives, and that makes it comfortable. But also, I feel like we all have that confidence within us, and Franny and Matt really help to facilitate the growth and the sprouting of those things that have always been inside of us. And things that like that atmosphere tries to stifle in you, tries to suffocate you, tries to silence you, like I said. So it's just being in that circle is one of the best parts of the week.
Thanks, Asia. Awesome. Okay, I have one more question before we wanted to answer everybody else's questions. And that question is for Jessica. Jessica, we have been talking about how a really good example of where some of this analysis comes from, which was part of your experience contributing an essay to the book's manuscript. So do you think you could take a minute or two and share what you were sharing with me with everybody else?
Sure. So part of what I am doing, as well as the discussions, the bi-weekly Sunday night discussions, is I'm writing an essay, and it was very open-ended about what I could write, which to me is incredibly difficult because I like parameters. I'm a person that really enjoys guidelines and rules, and like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. So I struggled for a long time about what I was actually going to write about. What part of this play was I going to analyze? I mean, I have admitted time and time again, not a huge fan of Richard III. Out of all of the plays, I was not super thrilled that we were doing this analysis on Richard. But what ended up happening was I had this entire view of what I was going to write. And it wasn't like I felt like it was kind of glossing over. It was kind of a cop-out. And so I kind of like, I wrote it and I was, like not feeling super great about it. And then just kind of like put it on the back burner. And then just one day there was a situation in my career life that like it had everything to do with Richard. And I wasn't thinking about, the essay. I wasn't thinking about Shakespeare, but it just really sparked something in me. And so I was like, okay, that's what I need to write about. I think that there's something to be said about returning citizens writing about their experiences behind bars, but more so about what happens when we get home and like how we do contribute to society and taking those experiences. And the best part about this book for me is that we're showing people that, Shakespeare is timeless and it does relate to life. Like you're going to hear from women of all different walks of life. Our ensemble is very diverse in that respect, which sometimes does cause conflict. It makes us have discussions that aren't super easy to have, but it also makes us have to, look outside ourselves. But when you look at this book and you see those notes and, because the women on the inside, they're a part of this too. Like that's the part we have to remember that. Like they're a huge part of this project. They may not have a voice right now at any kind of conference and they may not be recorded, but trust me when I say that they laid the foundation for everything that's happening with the book. So to just be able to correlate Shakespeare to, as a part of today's life, that's huge. So yeah, I just think that the process, while I tend to overthink things, it actually ended up just being more natural when I stopped overthinking it. And that was, and it proved what I've been telling people for years, like Shakespeare is a part of your life. Like it's still relevant today. So yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. I see that Karen posted a question in the chat, which is a really amazing question. And so Karen, in the words of the illustrious Scott Jackson, if I could welcome you into the space to ask your question, and I think that Matt would be the guy to answer that one.
Great, thanks, Franny. So my question is, since I am a teacher, do you think it might be possible to recreate some of this structure of opportunity in a classroom? If so, how? And then I'd also love to hear from the alums. How would you change the classrooms that you have been in to make them more open to this kind of connection and growth? So we can start with Matt, but I'd really love to hear from the alums as well.
Yeah, I would too. So I'm also a teacher of both high school and college, and I think for me, I tried to, being a facilitator with Shakespeare in Prison has made me a better teacher. It has made me prioritize creating a safe space within the classroom for people to be open to ideas and open to being vulnerable, voicing ideas that might be controversial, and hopefully also being less careful with their words when being careful with your words is about stifling rather than sensitivity, right? Because one of the things I really value about the circle in Shakespeare in Prison is that people are willing to say things that might be controversial, but never once will say things and get away with it that are insensitive once that safety has been created. However, I think the way that we treat education and classrooms in this country makes that an uphill battle, because everything in those classrooms, especially in high school and to some extent in college, is so high stakes, and students are taught to value being right over being honest. And I think that makes it really, really hard. And I would love to hear what our alums have to say about that.
Yeah, who wants it? Jessica wants it.
So I work for an organization that works with women in recovery, early recovery. And what really struck me was when Matt said, people tend to try to filter themselves, right? So I'm working with a woman right now who she does that to me all the time when we talk. And I finally said to her, I was like, have I done something that makes you feel like you have to censor what you're saying? Because if I have, like, I apologize. I want to know how you're feeling. Like, you're a person, I'm a person. Let's just talk like we're people, right? And so when I first came home, my first really professional job was running a teen program for kids with mental illness, addictions, and disabilities. And I pretty much based the entire program on the way that we ran the circle at, inside, because I needed them to know that, like, I am here for you. This is a safe space, and like, you matter and you have a voice. And I think it was so abnormal for them that it took a really long time for them to get to the point where they could be open and just like vulnerable. We would do some kind of theater, just like little game. They didn't realize it was a theater game. And in the beginning, they were all very closed off, and they just kind of felt like, funny about it, because you do look a little absurd when you're doing some of these. But then by the end of the year, they had all opened up, and they like would encourage the other ones, like the new people, to come in and like enjoy it. And so I think, yeah, there's a huge problem with the fact that in the education system, starting from when, they're kids, they're listening to somebody basically lecture them, right? It needs to be more collaborative, and they have to have a voice in it. I just presented right before this to a social work class, and it was interesting to me that in a social work class, we weren't going into breakout sessions, and we weren't, trying to figure out solutions for what we were talking about. They just had a panel, like a panel of people talking about the issues. These are the kids that want to solve the problems. Like, they're going to be the ones to do it. So we're definitely going to learn a lot as far as how we educate. And I think that educators need to learn from other, people in theater, people in social work, people that have received the same services that, some of these agencies are offering. It just, the discussion needs to be bigger than just educators.
Sarah or Asia, do you have anything to add, or should we see if anyone else has an additional question? Asia, you got something?
I was just going to say the vulnerability also in a classroom setting seems so one-sided. Educators kind of like expect their students to be forthcoming with things, but sometimes, the educator themselves is kind of like has this wall up, or, we can't share things. And so in the circle, everybody is on a level playing field. Everybody's thoughts are important. Everybody has something to teach and something to learn. And I think that if we want to replicate this in classrooms, we just have to, everyone has to be willing to be vulnerable in some way and share the best and the worst and the ugly side of whatever you're studying at that time.
Okay. Does anyone else want to come into the space and ask a question?
I've got a question. I think what you're doing is fabulous. I really hope it becomes a series. I think it's tremendous. One of the things that I was struck by in watching the tape, and Jessica's comments reinforced this a couple of minutes ago. I was really struck by the fact that people were drawn to this project because of working with the people that they would be working with, not because it was Richard III. It seemed like there was lots of love not directed towards Richard III. And I know that my students often have a lot of trouble because everybody's named Richard or everybody's named Elizabeth, and then they change their name. So sometimes they're, they're Gloucester, and then there's something else and all of that. So I'm wondering, was it just that this idea percolated after or while you were working on Richard III? And who made that decision? Like, who chooses the play that's being done any given season? And how did it end up being Richard III, given that it sounds like it would be a tough sell for most of these people to have Richard III tattooed on their arm with a heart around it?
I see that all three of the women on our panel have unmuted themselves. I will let you all collaborate to figure out who gets to go first.
So I feel like they're very strong personalities that are drawn to this program. And every season, when somebody really wants something, like there's like a whole campaign that is launched. So my second play was Romeo and Juliet, and I launched an entire campaign of that I wanted to play Juliet. Well, for Richard, there was a woman on the ensemble who really, really wanted to do this play. I mean, if signs and shaking hands and kissing babies was a thing, she was like a politician out there trying to make this come true. And none of us wanted to do this, but she was such a strong person in the ensemble that we trusted her. And that's where that trust comes in. Like, we trusted her and this idea that she had for this play. And we trusted each other to be able to bring this dark, depressing piece of art, to life. So we all have a hand in the decision making, but it's usually like one or two very strong vocal people in the group that like really make things happen.
Yeah, that was that situation with when we picked Richard III. So the woman that Asia's speaking about, her introduction to Shakespeare was the soliloquy from the beginning, wasn't it? I could be wrong, but Franny, correct me if I'm wrong. That was the first piece of Shakespeare that she performed. So she felt pretty attached to that. So I don't know that she had necessarily read the entire play, to be honest with you.
It was a personal attachment to the one monologue that she read aloud on her first day in the group.
Yeah. So that was my last season. And I remember thinking, I really don't want to do this play, but you know what? I love this person, and fine, let's just do it. Which is funny because in the beginning of my time at Shakespeare, I was going to get my way no matter what. I was such a brat. But when I look at like the plays that we did, and we never did the play that I chose, like that I wanted to do that year. But it ended up being that I would agree with whoever was campaigning. Like, they turned me into, like Taming of the Shrew. I did not want to do Taming of the Shrew, not by any means. And that was my favorite season. And the woman who was really campaigning for that play, her reasoning behind it made so much sense. And I knew that so many people would grow from the text of that play that I was like, okay, let's do it. And I really wanted Hamlet. So as far as picking Richard III, I think we ended up doing Richard because there were like the biggest number of us had performed in Richard III that could participate in this. So we, Franny and Matt really wanted people that actually performed or they were a part of the process to be able to do these discussions. So we ended up with Richard.
So I didn't get to pick Richard III because it was actually my first season. They choose the plays the end of the season prior. So because Richard was my first season, I came into it like brand new, had no idea about any of the other plays or so it was my first Shakespeare literally. And I was like, oh, this is actually not bad. Like Richard, I would say it's fairly easy, I guess, because it's really linear, like, the way the plot is. There's not a whole lot of like side stories in Richard. So I guess that just made it a little easier for me being new. And then of course, like next 2 seasons, like much better plays. So, but no, it was fine. Like I didn't mind doing it. And at the time I was doing it because I didn't know any other, I didn't know any better. And then doing the book, yeah, like Jessica said, because there was all of the people that had recently come out had all participated in Richard. So that just made it easier. And I actually didn't mind doing it a second time around. I felt like we definitely dug a little deeper in there, and like you learn more as you go, I guess. Like I learned even more the second time around. Because I think the first time again, I was, just struggling to learn the language and what he's trying to say. And then I was able to like definitely more know what he was saying and, have more thoughts on it.
Yeah. Thanks, folks. And this is, Lynn, when I saw your question in the chat, I was like, oh, yes, but this kind of bleeds over into answering your question, that we had, like they said, we had done this play just with the women's ensemble. We had the greatest number of alums out here who could be contributors. And that season was when we did our case study of the program to figure out what the mechanics of it even were. And we're not going to get into it today because we would talk about it for 2 more days. But like, we will send you the case study if you want it. In fact, Matt can post a link to it in the chat, so you can just grab it there if you want. But so we had from this case study a zillion, like hundreds of pages of verbatim quotations. So we're like, this will be the easiest one to start with. But I will tell you right now, we are prepared to move forward with at least one more. Hint, hint, wink, wink, stay tuned. And so yeah, and in creating the book, we felt like if we were to open it up to every ensemble member we'd ever worked with, that could get to be a very large, unruly group. And it was also, I should mention, really important to us to be able to compensate everyone for their work on this, which we did. And were we to employ more people on it, that goal would have been out of reach for us. So we limited this to people who had been in that particular ensemble, with the exception of the woman who created the original artwork, because that was another element that we needed. Because we did a crash course answer on Lynn's question there, I'd love to welcome Melinda into the space to ask your question.
Sure. Thank you, Franny. Hi, everyone. My question is posted in the chat. I loved what Asia said in the last session about the spell of Shakespeare. And I know she was talking about that on a personal level, but I kept also hearing folks talking about how they never would have come together if it hadn't been for this. And we've heard similar things in other sessions. And it was just this sort of emerging theme of community and Shakespeare as a force for creating community between people. But I also know that there's a fine line in being too precious with that. And I'm thinking that maybe the driving force for the community comes from within the individuals, and that maybe Shakespeare is just a key. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about Shakespeare as a force for community and what that entails or brings up for you. Thank you.
Who wants it first?
Okay, I'll go. I do think that it's important that it was Shakespeare, only because I think that his work just seems to like transcend, gender and time, and like his stories are relevant now. And it just made that easy for all the women in the group, and I'm sure in the men's ensemble too, to connect. Yes, it comes from the individuals, but there's literally all kinds that come to Shakespeare and get something out of it. So I think it needs to be, I'm sure you can find it in other theater groups, but I don't know. I really felt like Shakespeare was the reason. Also too, because it gives us a challenge. Some people don't know, don't read it, or they might not feel like they understand it. And it helps create confidence when you actually can. And that also, brings people together, because you're helping your neighbor type, you're helping your fellow inmate or whatever. I feel like the Shakespeare part is really important.
So I think that I used to think that the Shakespeare part was the most important part of it. And now I think that it's really just the fact that we all had a common goal, and we all wanted, we wanted to perform well. Yes, we got a lot out of the process. The process was the biggest gift. And I think that if you were to ask anybody from any of the ensembles, they would agree with that. But I also think that if you get a group of people together and they have a common mission and they have a heart for what they're doing, then chances are they're going to create community out of that. So I kind of have issue with the fact that so many, Shakespeare can be alienating to some people if they won't even try it, just because of, the idea that it's above their, their abilities. And so, even inside, people would be like, oh, like, that's so pretentious. And like, we would joke about it in the circle, but that's a real thing, so it can be alienating. I hope we get to a point where it's more inclusive. I think that theater as a whole is getting better about that. I think that there have been major moves made so that theater is for the masses, so that's good. But I love the fact that we performed. I think that was the biggest part for me, is the fact that we had an end goal, right? So it was something that you could measure, hey, we did it or we didn't do it. Sometimes it was better than others, and sometimes people's perspective on how it went they were different too. But at the end, and it was a 9-month process. At the end of those 9 months, we got up on stage, no matter what, and we performed 3 times, sometimes 4. So I think, to me, that was what meant the most. Was like that bonding experience of, okay, this is probably not going to go well, but at least we're all up there together. Or, like, it was always right after we performed that none of us wanted to stop. Even though, like, the 2 weeks leading up, we all wanted to kill each other. But then afterwards, that was what really bonded us together.
Do you want to say anything about that, Asia? Yeah.
I wish Jessica would move out of my brain. She gets in there and walks around and takes things. Because that was everything she just said was what I was going to say. Franny and Matt could have came in and taught us how to do face painting or build a box. But we all have the same goal, and their passion for Shakespeare is contagious. So even if you don't think that, this work is meant for you, like, they make it for you. And then after you really get into the text and you dive deep, you see that you connect with the characters, but it's not really about relating to the text more as much as it is about relating to the people around you. So everything Jessica said, amen to that.
I'd love to add from my perspective that in terms of using the Shakespeare, I don't remember exactly what your words were, Melinda, but like, I kind of look at Shakespeare as a really great tool for a lot of different things. And the fact that there is always a concern within the ensemble that we needed to work together as a team to dig into and fully understand the language, always a concern about the audience, which you would have in any audience. And the creative, I'm totally not going to get emotional right now, but the incredible creativity that is required to tell the story the way that the ensemble feels it needs to be told, to bring in their entire community who will be in that auditorium, and the intense empathy that takes, including from people who are like, I understand it, but then they have to stop and think about, okay, but not everybody understands it the way that I do. everything from like placards telling you what's going on to kind of pantomimes, to cutting the text in a way that makes it more palatable, understandable, to oh my gosh, I don't know, like it just like any solution that you could think of, these folks have found. And so it does, for me, it has always created a sense of community within a community, that we're in a way bringing the audience into our ensemble, based on the challenges that we have had, that we want to alleviate for everybody else, make the experience more enjoyable. So that's one thing that I've observed from my own perspective that has been really exciting. I want to really add quickly, because I meant to say it before and then I didn't, that Michaela Hull, who is part of one of our major contributors and was part of our pre-recorded session, she couldn't be here today, but I did want to loop back to that maybe nobody else likes this play except for like me, but Michaela does have a really deep connection to Richard himself, that she didn't get into in the pre-recorded session, but that it runs so deep for her that she still talks about him like in the first person, and so that's just something I wanted to mention, that despite the fact that we've got some haters in the room, there was one member of our team who, and I think because of her connection being so deep, she kind of forced the rest of us to go with her a bit, right? And like have more empathy for him and think of him in a totally different way. And I think that drive to empathize with like one of the most villainous of the villains helped us have empathy for a lot of other characters in the play who we may not have either.
And specifically, she spoke a lot and has for a long time, and there's material in the book and in the sample material that we sent, that I posted in the chat. She speaks a lot about the deep connection with the outsiderness of him, and the way that he clearly has a dysfunctional relationship with his mother, and how he is in some ways like simply fulfilling what everybody has told him he is, which is a villain. And she connected that to not only to her identity as a now formerly incarcerated person, but also as a Black woman, and how people never expected anything but violence from her.
Thanks. Karen, you have another really awesome question in the chat. Do you want to ask that? And then I think we all know who should lead that off.
Yeah, I would love to, if you don't mind me asking a second. But Franny, you mentioned cutting the text, and I was wondering if that was also a process that you went through together as a group, or if the facilitators made choices about editing the text.
I know who wants to answer that one first.
So I would say that the majority of the cuts probably came from me. So I think it started with Romeo and Juliet, and we just realized that, we needed to really cut, because a couple of our key members of our cast had not done the work. And so we needed to make sure that this was going to work. So we ended up cutting entire scenes. And there are scenes that you would like, if I told you what they were, you'd be like, what? Why? But it worked. And then after we did that, we knew that we could just do cuts, and not get very precious about it. But it goes back to like what Franny said. We had to really keep in mind the audience. Plus, we're in prison, and so you can't do Hamlet in prison. Like, you have to make cuts. So it was the ensemble. We would go through the play and we would make initial cuts, and people would argue about it, and like they really wanted to keep it. And then by the end, people would be like, can you make some more cuts for me? Because there's just so much there, and it just makes the process a lot easier. I used to get really upset about when people wouldn't take my advice for cuts. And then I realized that by the end of the season, they were going to make those cuts anyway. So I just was like, okay, fine. There's actually a portion of the book so we do talk about why we made the cuts that we made. but there was never anything cut that somebody felt incredibly close to. Like if somebody really had a connection to that like that part of it, we did not cut it. A lot of it was just for time. You know, we're in prison and there's chow lines and you don't know when they're going to end and when people can get there and people have to get back for count. And we had a time slot where count was right afterward. So, but I just wanted to point out real quick too, like it's really great that for all of the issues that I have with MDOC in general, like the fact that they allowed us to have this program after we were out it's been a game changer. It has changed so many of our lives. I left there thinking that I would never talk to Franny ever again and that it was against the rules. Like she was not going to be a part of my life. And then I got a phone call and it was allowed. So, there's a process about Shakespeare Acclaim too, that is a big part of how this book came about. Like the fact that we have to get approved through our agent to be a part of this. But also the fact that like Kyle Kosminski, like he really went to bat for this program and he has allowed it so that it's just something normal that the agents get, like, we get permission for this. So I think that's a testament to the program, that they trust the program, but also that they've seen how it has affected and, every participant. So yeah, cuts always ended up being like an area of conflict for a while. And then, it just all kind of just pans out.
Thanks, Jessica. So I know that technically we're supposed to stop at 4. I know that at least some of us can stick around if we want to. But I know that, so Asia has to jump off. Goodbye, Asia. Thank you. I know that Niels has posted a question in the chat. Niels, do you want to ask your question with your voice?
Yeah. So there's a famous Shakespeare scholar, Richard Stryer, who wrote a book called The Irreverent Renaissance, I think it's called, and he talks about he writes that Shakespeare wanted his audience to think about their pleasure in watching this play because it's so full of theatrical device and invention. And I was wondering whether any of you, cause it's so easy, it's so facile to moralize this play and one's relationship to it and the main character. But I was wondering if any of you felt that a part of your theatrical intention was pleasuring your audiences.
Me. I think yes. That I played Margaret in Richard III when we did it in Huron Valley, and her first entrance was I had with some help with the facilitators coming up with like a way to bring her in. Like part of her first monologue there, she's kind of speaking to herself, or like whispering under her breath, I guess, while she's watching some things go on stage. And I really wanted to like draw the audience in and also kind of shock them. So I kind of snuck in through the back of the auditorium and began speaking at the back, and it kind of like startled some viewers. And so I really enjoyed watching them enjoy themselves. That was definitely a thought process in putting that play together, at least for, I think for many of us actually. It's where a lot of the creativity came in too, is trying to make sure that the audience, as much as we could, get them to understand what was going on, because again, they aren't studying the language. So with doing the scenes in certain ways and different movements and whatnot and gestures, I think a lot of us thought about what the audience was going to think and how we could get them to understand what was going on and entertain them.
Jessica, did you want to add to that?
I mean, I think that we also, like, throughout the years, we figured out what they liked too. So they enjoy when we come in from the back of the auditorium, or, just, I think the whole point of it for me, like, was about the audience. and also I always would tell that, especially the new ensemble members, like, trust your audience. They're there to support you. Like, they're there to cheer you on. They're not coming to watch you fail. But for women in prison, like, there's a lot of trauma that leads up to prison. So if you've never really felt supported in your life, you're going to assume that that's the experience that you're going to have on stage. I think after the first performance, most women know, like, this is just amazing. Like, I was a heroin addict, and like, the high that I get from being on stage is way better than anything that I ever, put in my body. So yeah, I think it is really a big part of the discussions that we have. They're about what our audience would want.
Thanks, guys. I want to throw it to Melinda before we keep going at all.
Thank you. I just want to do a formal closing in case anybody needs to jump off here at the end, but we're going to keep the meeting open for a little after hours conversation, a little less formal. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Sarah, Asia, and Jessica. Thank you, Franny and Matt. Shout out to all of your collaborators who could not be here today, and also to the folks still inside who are a part of this fantastic program at Detroit Public Theater.